antics in the crowd.
Lots of crazy antics.
That made it go viral.
We're good? Okay, well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to the Poison Pen Bookstore. My name is Patrick Milliken, and it is a real treat and an honor to welcome Brigadier General Anthony J. Tata to the Poison Pen for the first time. Please help me give him a nice warm welcome. So I have my introduction. He's, as you're about to see, he's a bit of an underachiever. Brigadier General Anthony J. Tata, U.S. Army retired, most recently performed the duties of Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the number 3 position in the United States Department of Defense, where he implemented the National Defense Strategy and worked closely with allies and partners to achieve strategic defense goals globally. His distinguished military career includes commands in the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne Divisions, and the 10th Mountain Division, as well as operations in Afghanistan, Bosnia, Croatia, North Macedonia, Kosovo. I should have practiced these pronunciations. Afghanistan, Bosnia, Croatia, North Macedonia, right? Kosovo, Panama, and Haiti. His military awards and decorations include the Bronze Star, the Combat Action Badge, Ranger Tab, Master Parachutist Badge, and the Department of Defense Award for Distinguished Public Service. Let's see here. He is also the national best-selling author of 15 novels, including Besieged, the Publishers Weekly Top 10 Mystery Thriller of 2017, and Foreign and Domestic, a Barry Award finalist in 2016. And the Barry Award, isn't that a Australian mystery award? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it's
Or
part
Canadian.
of the Voucher Con
Yeah.
deal. So.
Right. Tony is a frequent guest commentator on a variety of popular cable news programs regarding foreign policy, with over 1,000 appearances, and is a Newsmax national security contributor. He is a West Point graduate with a Bachelor of Science and has 2 master's degrees, one from the U.S. Army School of Advanced Military Studies in Operational Planning, and another from the Catholic University of America in International Relations. He was also a Distinguished National Security Fellow at Harvard University's JFK School of Government. So there you have it. Welcome.
Well,
Glad
thank
to
you.
have you here.
Thank
And thanks everybody for tuning in. I'll be kind of monitoring the comments field, so if you have questions, go ahead and put them in, and I'll be happy to ask them. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, roger that. Thanks, Patrick, for that kind introduction. Thanks to you, Patrick number 2, Amy, and Jacob, and Barbara, who owns the place. So great staff here. This is one of the must-do stops on any author's book tour, and I appreciate, Patrick, that kind introduction, so thank you. We've got a lot of friends here from Intertech Engineering, and world-renowned aviation engineering consulting company, so thanks for coming out, guys. I'm proud to be on the team. And, whenever I get that kind of introduction, I'm sort of reminded of never believe your own press releases. And it reminds me when I was in Afghanistan, and it just occurred to me as I was listening to him, we were in combat, and I was on the Joint Operations Center floor, and I was directing planes and approving missile strikes and so forth, what generals do in combat. And my commander of the Special Forces, who reported to me, Ed Reeder, Colonel then, Ed Reeder, now retired Major General, he came up to me and said, "Hey, sir, what are 2 alpha males like us doing here in the JOC, Joint Operations Center, when we should be down there in Helmand Province?" And like, they needed a colonel and a general in that thing, like they needed, 100 more Taliban attacking. But I said, "You know what, Ed, you're right, let's go." And so we went, and we spent all day. As the sun came up, there were casualties, and kind of being on the front lines with the troops. And as the day wore on, and the helicopter was coming in to pick us up, we're standing in Poppy about waist high, and it's me, Colonel Reeder, his radio operator, my radio operator. And I always carried a weapon with me, a rifle, but for some reason I didn't have one. And so the Special Forces radio operator says to Colonel Reeder, "Sir, we just got an intercept that there's an enemy sniper across the river, and his instructions are to shoot the one without the rifle." And I look at Ed, he's got his rifle. I look at the radio guy, he's got his rifle. I look at my guy, he's got his rifle. I look down, I got my pistol. I'm like, Ed Reeder, you got to know Ed Reeder, but he spit some tobacco into the ground, into the poppies, and he looks at me and he says, "Sir, it looks like you're about to have a bad day." and I'm like, "Well, Colonel, consider this a direct order to give me that rifle." And he just laughed and he didn't give me the rifle. I should have fired him. He was actually at my Raleigh book signing with Quail Ridge, and it's a lot of fun. But never believe your own press releases. But thanks for that kind introduction, Patrick. And so, 15th novel. This is the second in the Garrett Sinclair series, and Chasing the Lion was the first, and that came out 2 years ago. And normally it's one book a year, but because I went into government service as Undersecretary of Defense, as you heard, that creates I wasn't allowed to write during that time, nor should I have, because it's a full-time 24/7 job being the number 3 guy in the Pentagon. And so that puts an air gap in the cycle. So I turned in book 3 a month ago. That'll come out this time next year. And so I'm back on track. But there's a 2-year break between Chasing the Lion, which came out June 2 years ago, and Total Empire. But so Total Empire is the classic. The protagonist is Lieutenant General Garrett Sinclair. He's the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, active duty, and he's confronted with the quintessential mission versus men dilemma that many commanders face when his goddaughter goes missing in this obscure terrain feature in Africa, and he has to go rescue her on an unauthorized mission, and while doing that, uncovers a plot by the Chinese government and military to use a targeting system to guide hypersonic glide vehicles that are with nuclear weapons on them into the United States. And so it starts out with the loss. The very first chapter is about the loss of his command sergeant major in combat with Sinclair there. And his command sergeant major is his best friend, and the command sergeant major's daughter is his goddaughter. And so no book signing is complete without a reading from the book. So I'm going to read you really what this book is all about. And so Sinclair says, "As I led the charge to where Sly, who's his sergeant major, lay dead by the executioner's sword, the Sherpa buzzed into the night. I looked skyward briefly, searching for God. He's a very devout guy, and wondering if he was there. The firmament was pricked with 1,000,000 angry stars. The cool morning air would soon evaporate into stifling heat, propelled by harsh winds when the sun rose. My command sergeant major was gone, and we weren't outfitted or authorized to sustain combat operations on the ground for more than 24 hours. I sucked in rapid breaths, stifling the emotions swirling in my mind and heart. I thought immediately of Zoey Morgan, Sly's daughter, and the impossible task of telling her this horrible news." So that's really what the book is about, because it sets up, as a commander in Afghanistan, the 10th Mountain Division and the Joint Task Force, we had about 87 casualties, killed in action. And every time you make a decision about a military operation, you know that you're putting people's lives at risk. And that's why it's so important to think about the mission versus men, as it's called, the dilemma. And it includes women, of course. It's not exclusive of that. But what Sinclair is confronting his personal conflict is, do I continue to feed my closest people on this special task force that I lead that's responsive to the president, called Task Force Dagger, into the maw and continue to do mission after mission, lose good people, and for what? And at the end of the day, the bureaucracy is an uncaring, unfeeling entity that he's weighing in his mind, is it worth it, what I do? And that's really the personal conflict that the protagonist has. And of course, I bring in, you got to have, with your protagonist, you got to have an antagonist that is either equal or better to make the challenge harder for the protagonist. And so, as I was researching this book, looking for a really good bad guy, I found I was thinking, who carries? I was thinking about swordsmen, and I was thinking who was the best from a lineage standpoint at using a sword, a saber. And all my research took me back to the executioners of France, and their name was Sanson. And so I just create Henri Sanson, who is the antagonist in this book, one of them, and the primary antagonist. And so he's this expert his bloodline is the executioners that would sever the heads. Even when the guillotine came along, the Sansons managed the guillotine and chopped off the heads of whoever they were told to cut off the heads. And I guess that kept them out of the line of fire, so to speak, being the ones who actually did the execution. So that's the bad guy. And that we see that in the very first chapter where the Sergeant Major is executed. And that sets up the narrative drive for this story. And as I get asked a lot, does my personal life come in as, hey, how you doing? Come on, have anything to do? And of course, I'm writing the book, so there's obviously something from me coming out onto the page, but I'm never grinding an axe. My worldview maybe a little bit, but not much. But I'm always thinking about the next book. And so when I was actually in Morocco 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, January 2021, so it'd be 2 years ago, the attaché met me there. He's a surfer, and I'm a surfer. And he's like, hey, sir, I was on an official visit meeting with the Ministry of Defense. I'd been in Bulgaria, Maldives, Saudi Arabia, Mozambique, Equatorial Guinea, and Morocco. It's like 2 weeks of signing defense deals. And in my last trip, the embassy attaché said, hey, sir, you got to get down to this place called Dakhla. And Dakhla is like the Baja Peninsula is to the United States, and Mexico. It's this little jutting peninsula that comes off of formerly Western Sahara that Morocco annexed a few years ago. And it was its own entity. And hi, come on in, have a seat.
Thank you.
Feel free. So I started researching Dakhla, and Dakhla is this little resort town now, and a great surfing mecca, and they're building it into this 5-star peninsula. And so as I was doing it, I zoomed out because I was thinking, okay, that's really fascinating, interesting place, exotic location to put a book. And I saw this terrain feature in Mauritania, and I zoomed back in, and it looks exactly like an eye from the satellite shot. And it's crazy. It's an almond shape, about 20 kilometers wide, and 3 concentric rings that look exactly like an iris. And it's called the Eye of Africa. And if you pull up Google Earth and you put in Eye of Africa, or hi, come on in, see. put in RICOT structure, RICHAT. It'll take you to this thing, and it's really fascinating. And so I started researching that. I'm like, well, that'd be a great place. There's got to be some mystery around this thing, and that'd be a great place to have combat action. All right, come on in. So this Eye of Africa becomes, come on, feel free to come right here. In fact, would you like to talk, sir? As I read it, Plato, hundreds of years before, obviously, described, when he was describing Atlantis, he laid out dimensions that are exactly the dimensions of the Eye of Africa. 3 concentric rings, X kilometers apart. And so as I dove into it, I'm like, there's no way. And then they found whale bones and shark teeth and all that around this terrain feature. And there is a theory out there, it's debatable, but that this was Atlantis. And I'm like, oh my God, this is too good. And so that's a little tiny piece of it. It's all grounded in reality, but I mentioned the Atlantis piece because I find it fascinating. And as I was researching Plato, one of the things that and my mind just takes me to different places, but I found this quote from Plato that was really the theme of the book, and it says, "The children of those who die in war, the highest authority is specially entrusted with the duty of watching over them above all other citizens." And so the passage I previously read, he's got to tell the daughter of his command sergeant major that her father is dead, and it's his goddaughter. And so Zoey goes missing in the Eye of Africa, and that's Sinclair, who's already on the ropes from chasing the lion. He's got all these, he of course saves the day in chasing the lion in the previous book, and he's got some flack he's getting from the bureaucracy in the Pentagon, and so he's always constantly having to look over his flank there, and he decides to go on this mission without approval to Dakwa, where he's operating out of, and then he takes his helicopter into the Eye of Africa to find his goddaughter. And while he's there, he uncovers a plot by the Chinese that involves these hypersonic glide vehicles. Now I have a bunch of propulsion and power engineers in here, and they're probably going to read this and say, that's not possible. So for those that just walked in, there's a lot of Intertech engineers in here, down in Chandler, Intertech engineer, consulting company. And so anyway, the narrative drive is really about finding Zoey Morgan, and then it transitions to, oh my God, we got to stop the Chinese from doing this crazy thing. And so the title of the book, Total Empire, just kind of came to me, and I was, the book came out last Tuesday, and I think that day I had the Laura Ingram radio show I was on, and she started talking about, it was all the China-Russia news was breaking last week. And, as Patrick mentioned, I do a lot of commentary on, Fox, and I used to do a lot of CNN when you could do both of those, but now it's so divided as a country that it's not really possible. But and Laura's reading all this stuff about China, Russia, and what do I think? And she says, "Oh my gosh, General, the title of your book is Total Empire, and isn't that what the Chinese are trying to do?" I said, "Well, that's a perfect segue then." And it's always nice to have something that's topical, because the book writing and production cycle is like 18 to 24 months. It takes you 9 months to write a book, and then it's 12 months for St. Martin's typically. Like I just turned in book 3 on to follow this a month ago. It'll probably be out this time next year. And it's the production cycle, the edits, and they're planning logistics because this fabulous bookstore here, Poison Pen, they had to order this book months ago, and the publisher had to print it months ago, and they send out advanced reader copies before that to all the review houses. Speaking of which, Publishers Weekly gave this a great review and said it gives a nod to Tom Clancy with the hypersonic glide vehicles and a nod to Clive Cussler with the Eye of Africa mystery. So I figured that was pretty high praise to be mentioned with in the same sentence with both of those fabulous authors. So and the real essence here is mission versus men. The internal conflict that the general is feeling of continuing to fight the good fight, but he's losing people, and is it worth it? And that's his real conflict internally. He's lost his wife. His wife supposedly died of cancer. And if you haven't read Chasing the Lion, a lot of that is the backstory of his wife and Melissa, who was college roommates with Kim Campbell, who is now the president. At Meredith College in Raleigh, they were roommates, and one night at a drinking party that Campbell set up, the three, Melissa, Kim Campbell, and one friend, the friend dies from alcohol poisoning. So the question is, the only other person that knew this was Melissa. When the governor of North Carolina then runs for president, and Melissa suddenly gets sick, is there something amiss there? And so that I keep that alive, that suspicion and that tension between the president and Garrett Sinclair, because Task Force Dagger, which this book is all about, is a direct reporting unit, subunit of Special Operations Command that does presidential directed missions. And so that tension, Sinclair's got a special encrypted cell phone where he talks to the president, and I have a lot of fun with that because the tension between think about having unfettered access to the president, but he might have killed your one true love, or she might have killed your one true love and wife. So he can't prove it. He sometimes thinks it, sometimes he says, no, it's not possible. And so having just turned in book 3, I have some fun with that again. So that's really Garrett Sinclair. It's when I write, it's all about character, and we all love to watch TV or read books because we like the character. And to me, that's what this is all about. The plot is important, but you got to like the character, or you're not going to read the book at the end of the day. And getting some great feedback on Goodreads and Amazon and all those things on Total Empire, and I hope all of you enjoy it when you pick it up. But it's a real privilege to be here. And I think what I like to do now, after talking for about 20-25 minutes, is take some questions, and feel free to ask me anything. I get everything from questions about the book, about my writing, about current events. Feel free, I'm wide open. Yes, sir.
Given your prior career, are you required to submit, even though it's a novel, for make sure you don't say anything that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I submitted my first novel, Sudden Threat, to the Army Public Affairs Office back in 2008 or 9, something like that. They read it and said, yeah, you're center line where you need to be. You don't need to do this anymore as long as you take good care. Now, like Jack Carr submits his, and he publishes his books with the redactions in there because it's actually more, Jack's a good friend, he's a great American, but they haven't required me to do that since my first one. and it's a good thing to do. I've had, I still have a top secret clearance and SCI, all of that. But I know after 40 years in this business not to get near the live wire. It's not worth it to even pretend to get close to it because people will be suspicious. So, other questions? Yes, Ron.
So how does your real life experiences influence your thoughts?
How do my real life experience influence my writing process? And I'm repeating it for the camera
Yes.
here. For the live stream. It's part of who I am, Ron. I served for 28 years in the military, served for a year in DOD in the previous administration as the undersecretary. I take serious my duty to this country, and so when I create a protagonist, I want that protagonist to have the best qualities of someone who loves his country.
Mhm.
And so I think that comes from me. The internal conflict, everything else just about is made up. But because I have been in combat, I have been under fire, I did have my helicopter shot down. Those real life experiences influence as I'm writing. I understand the fear, the emotion, the adrenaline, the how your mind just shuts all your systems down and you focus on the task at hand. That's very tactile for me because I've been through it, but it doesn't mean I'm writing about that experience. It's a translation of, okay, I've done that. And I do little things like Sinclair. I played baseball at West Point. Sinclair plays baseball at West Point. I think every protagonist I had played baseball. So it's whether Jake Mahegan was a wrestler. I also wrestled at West Point. But it's little things like that that I'm never grinding an axe. I don't impose. People read to escape, and I don't ever want anybody to think that I'm preaching to them how they ought to think and that kind of thing. The sentence should evaporate in the reader's mind, and they should be totally engrossed and engaged, caring about the protagonist and whether or not he or she is going to be able to accomplish their mission and resolve their conflict.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
I know you said that you had to take 2 years off between, or at least 1 year, right, between writing books. I'm sure you didn't stop thinking about it, but was it hard to really get back into it and start putting all those thoughts after a whole year of a break?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I was for those that got here a few minutes after we started, when I was the Undersecretary of Defense, I was legally obligated not to write. Not that I had the time to do so, that job was a 24/7 job, and I couldn't even think really about creatively about anything. It was all consuming, and so on the rare instance that I had a Sunday afternoon where I wasn't in the office or whatever, I would infrequently I would pop up and say, oh, that, because my mind's always thinking, right? And it's kind of like the DACA conversation with talking to the attaché. I was there on business, but he mentions this and it, sits in the back of my mind. So that's a really good example of your question. Is that I wasn't thinking about writing, but because I'm a writer at heart, this is my 15th novel, I just started looking at Google Earth and looking at the map and looking at it, I'm like, yeah, that'd be a really cool place to have a book take place. And lo and behold, that's this book. So those little sparks come from that.
So did you go back to the Three Rings to do research?
Say again?
Did you go back to the Three Rings to do research, write your book?
I did not go to this location for research. I typically do go to the location. I had a book, Mortal Threat, that took place in Tanzania, and I took my daughter to on a safari, and I told the driver, I said, all right, stop here. You know, I had it all mapped into my mind. It's about a medical student involved in an orphanage over there that discovers a cure for people, and her orphanage gets attacked by ISIS. It's a race across the center. And so, we went to the Olduvai Gorge. We saw the oldest bipedal footprint, and all of that kind of factors into that. And so here, with the tools available today, you can almost do a lot of your research with Google Earth. That's what happened here. You know, the parts. If I'm doing like a chase scene in DC, I'll go drive that road, and so that I get a feel for. You know, I don't want to have them run in the wrong way, or traffic going the wrong way, that kind of thing. That any person can check and say, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about.
I have a question from the online, one of the online.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand go.
Go ahead.
That's all right.
What is for the author process? What is throughout all your books? What's your favorite process through the entire publication, from start to finish? Is there a certain
Part of the
Yeah,
process?
the entire
Yeah,
process.
that's a really good
Yeah.
question. What's my favorite part of the author process? There's really three chunks. There's the writing, there's the editing, and there's the marketing. So I'm marketing right now, right? But I'm also on my MacBook back in my room. I've got my manuscript that I turned in a month ago to my editor, and he read it and said, "Love this. You know, take a look at this and this." So I'm editing, and I'm thinking about the book after the next one, and starting to and so this is really the crunch time. The book came out Tuesday last week, and for like 3 weeks after release of the book. You got all three things happening at once. I love the writing and the creating. I love this part, getting out and talking to people, and Patrick up at the front desk came and said, "Hey, I love your stuff. I've read all your books." You know, it's great to get that kind of positive feedback, right? And I always tell people, if you like the book, give me a great 5-star Amazon review, and if you don't, send me a personal private email. But the editing part, not so much. I must tell you what, they send you the track changes right on the next level. My editor, Mark Resnick is amazing. The St. Martin's team is amazing. Fantastic support. Joe Rinaldi, Lily Kroenig, his assistant. They're Mac Nicholas. They're all fantastic people that work hard to support authors, and they have a team of editors. So like Mark is my editor, but he's really like a senior vice president in St. Louis Press. And then there's the editors, like the young Columbia English majors that come in and work at St. Louis Press. And I'm not being derisive at all. They make it a better book, but they send it, and it's like every sentence has something, right? And I'm like, I got an A in grammar. But when I write, I'm just getting it on the paper. And my West Point classmate, or roommate, last night, I was in Dallas at Half Price Books, and he's the head of the marketing department of the business school at SMU, Southern Methodist. And so we had dinner last night and had breakfast this morning, and he was saying that I was telling him about the editing process. Like, I get from St. Martin's Press all these edits, and they disable accept all changes. and so you have to look at every single edit that they have done. Now, when I was previously with Kensington, they didn't do that. I did accept all changes. Then I printed it out and I read through it, and I would find some things that didn't make sense. But it's good what St. Martin's does, because it compels you to look at every single correction that's been done. And sometimes, that's not what I intended. Maybe, the comma there isn't really what, changes the meaning of the sentence, kind of thing. So it's good to do that. But I still don't like it. Online question.
Yeah, question is, which came first, the desire to be a soldier or the desire to be a writer?
Ooh, really good question. So I grew up in Virginia with a great tradition, Jamestown, Williamsburg, Civil War battlefields, student of history. And so as a kid, I was always fascinated by history. And I was also a big reader. I was one of those guys that would go to book fair and come home with a bag full of books. And both my parents were educators and encouraged me to do a lot of reading. And so I would say it's almost parallel because when I was in high school, I'd been to most of the battlefields in Virginia, where Revolutionary War, Civil War, and a real student of all that kind of thing, and understanding, a lot of these generals went to West Point, Grant, Lee, etc. And so that'd be a cool place to go. And my parents loved it. They were both by this time school counselors, and so they understood the deal. And I had a brother at the Naval Academy, and they're saying, like, "Or you want to go there?" Because they don't have to pay for it, right? And but I thought it'd be really cool to go to West Point. So when I was a teenager, but when I was 12, my dad asked me, "So kid, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "Dad, I want to be a fiction novelist." And he laughed and he said, "You got to put food on the table, kid." So that was the encouraging. But importantly, this book is dedicated to both my parents, who are somewhere else now. But they were so encouraging of my writing career, and I talk about my father, and I'm transitioning a little bit away from the question, but it sparked a memory. My father was a beloved high school football coach and a politician in the Virginia General Assembly, representing the community in which we grew up. And one of his former football players did an article on him and said, at the end, Dad was 88, struggling a little bit with dementia, and Dad said, at the end of the day, just take care of your family, and that's all that matters in life. And it dovetails with part of my giving Sinclair this dilemma of mission or men. Do I take care of the people I love, my family, my kids, and my men and women, or do I do this mission? And what's more important? Do I feed them into the maw or not? So, yeah, but I kind of want to do both and kind of have done both. So, yes, sir.
To extend that question, West Point and the Green Machine, you never have to worry about, gee, I've got all this extra time. So when did you actually say, okay, it's now time to start? And
Yeah, so I don't really remember when I started writing. It's kind of like reading. I've just been writing all my life. When I was doing the talk at Half Price Books last night, Ed Fox, my roommate, who without him I would not have graduated. He's a legit genius. He studied by teaching. We laughed about that last night. I said, "You remember me with my spiral notebooks, and you ask me what I'm doing, and I tell you I'm writing stories, and then we had conversations." So that I was 17, 18 years old, sitting in my bunk in West Point at night, not studying but writing. Joking a little bit, but so it wasn't until probably when I was a young captain in the Army, and I was sitting watching TV one night, and I'd read all these books by like Stephen King, Dante McCabe, on writing, how to write a mystery, all the must reads for if you want to be a writer. And I'm just watching some stupid mind candy show. I'm like, why am I watching this? I'm consuming content when I want to create content. I shut the TV off and I went and just started writing. This was before the advent of the $3,000 IBM computer back in 92 or whatever it was, 93. and then when that word processor came on, I wrote my first novel, which I've never submitted for publication, and Word Perfect. That'll tell you how old it is, right? And and it's on a floppy disk. Well, is now like in my Dropbox, but you know, several iterations from transitioning from Word Perfect to Word, and it's called The Last Gamble, and it's about a Heisman Trophy running back at West Point who gets caught in a mob point shaving scheme. And what I did just there, that's called the log line. You should be able to describe your book in one sentence. And I wrote that, and I went back and read it, and I'm like, man, this is really good. You know, it's a little outdated now. You know, if you wrote it for today, you'd have to have smartphones and all of that. But the principle is the same. That you know, you got conflict over money and greed and all that kind of stuff. So, but, yeah. Other questions? That's
Most of us won't actually experience what bureaucracy actually looks like. So someone that's been in it in the day to day, right, 24/7. I mean, a lot of people say their job's 24/7, but it sounds like your job was actually 24/7. How do you handle that bureaucracy in this type of setting? And just give us an example of what that even looks like.
Yeah, so I was talking with Patrick number 2 over here. One of the recurring themes in my books is, the protagonist is a G.I. Joe action figure, and he's always at war with the bureaucracy, because I remember this old, what is it, Ernie and Joe or something, the cartoons from the Korean War, World War II. And you have these two guys with their helmets off, they're digging a foxhole, and one of them says to the other, so-and-so's back at platoon headquarters have it easy, and they're like 10 yards behind them, right? And so you always are at war with your headquarters, whether you're like a squad and 10 yards that way, or they're living it up, in platoon headquarters or company, or the further you are from the front, there's this mystique about how easy life is. What I would say is, in a recurring theme in my books is the protagonist trying to make the bureaucracy work for his soldiers, which, to Ron's question, is part of my life, whether I was a general or a superintendent. It was trying to make the central office or the headquarters work for your teachers or for your soldiers, and to get maximum efficiency out of your organization. So, but it's always fun to have, a marginally competent bureaucrat in there that is, out there for themselves, and I often put that in there. And sometimes I have like a hero that saves the day that's in the bureaucracy, because there are those. And when I was the undersecretary, the public servants that serve in the Pentagon, those jobs are 24/7. When in the policy shop, you're like the COO of the world. You're constantly monitoring whether it's the Navalny poisoning. You got to send options to the president. How do we respond to this? Russia coming into Belarus and along the Ukrainian border, flexible turn options going to the president, and it's a constant churn. Withdrawal from Afghanistan, etc. And there are a lot of good people in there working hard every day, all day, and there are some that are more concerned about themselves than they are about the overall mission, which is part of Sinclair's angst in his book. It's like these guys. They don't understand what I'm doing. So. Other questions?
Well, Tony, I definitely want a signed book today. But I do want to take the opportunity to ask you about the China-Russia relationship, because I don't know history as well. And when was the last time, if ever, that this has occurred? And where do you think it's going?
Yeah. So the question is about China, Russia, and where do I think it's going. And it's a very concerning time in our country right now. We've got domestic divisions unlike anything I've ever experienced, that are their own sort of national security threat because our enemies, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, see us as fighting one another, which is the perfect time for anybody to probe your wire, so to speak. And so as the Afghanistan mission, I think it's fair to say that didn't go exactly how anybody wanted it to go. The administration, and certainly not a combat veteran from Afghanistan, I had a lot of soldiers call me and ask me, was it worth it, that kind of thing. The veteran community, a generation of veterans, 20 years, went through that. And so the psyche of the veteran community, when that happened, was really fractured. But equally importantly, our enemies saw something that was really never talked about. And I talked about it on Fox and Newsmax and everywhere else, but it was that we had a policy with NATO. We came in together to Afghanistan. Remember, France submitted the Article 5 after 9/11 to get attack against one is attack against all. So 22 years ago after 9/11, that created this out-of-area mission that was a NATO mission, unified NATO mission. And so we went into Afghanistan. We had all the NATO nations there. Some had, when I was there, I had a brigade combat team from Canada with a Brent paratrooper battalion working in Helmand province. And the smallest countries like Romania and others had what they call provincial reconstruction teams, 20, 30 people at outposts all around the country. And so when we left in August, when all of Europe is on vacation, think about that, without any lateral coordination, in a pell-mell fashion, leaving everybody to fend for themselves. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's the talking points. It broke NATO. It fractured NATO in a very serious, real way. Putin saw that. And he said, if I'm ever going to do what I want to do, now is the time. And so he moved into Belarus, along the border. And now, a year later, China is seizing on this opportunity to flex its muscle. There's about four main elements of national power. You got diplomacy, information, military, economic. And we've tried the sanctions. All that's done really is weaken the dollar. The diplomacy has been non-existent. And maybe nobody can talk to Putin, but we got to try. We haven't, I don't think, tried. Information warfare, I think that's right. You got two experts at it in Ukraine and Russia, and there's so much quote unquote misinformation flying around. It's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. And then where I give the administration high marks is the military response, rotating brigade combat teams from 101st Airborne and 1st Armored Division, etc., into Poland, into Romania, into the Baltics to do what we call a flexible deterrent option. That has been, I think, sound. And I was Lloyd Austin's deputy commanding general in the 10th Mountain Division, and I was a paratrooper battalion commander for him when he was brigade commander. That was his direct report twice. And so I think he's done a good job of deploying the military option. But we can't always and shouldn't always lead with the chin of the American soldier. And so the State Department needs to do something here, in my opinion. China sees this internal division, and they've stepped toward Putin. And the thing that worries me the most is China's raging economy backstopping Russia and their weakened economy. And that could really pose real problems for us. If we continue to look at Ukraine without any, you can't even talk about a diplomatic solution without being accused of being a Putin stooge. That's the place we're at now in the country. And, I was on with Stuart Varney the other day on Fox Business, and he's like, well, General, you want to just give Ukraine to Putin? I said, no, it'd make me happy if Putin was dead tomorrow and they backed all the Russians out. But we got to start talking. And I said, Stuart, think about the Balkans. You had Serbs, the Serbian military, and Milosevic, and all those really bad people. It was just as bad, if not worse. They had torture chambers on the old Olympic bobsled run. I personally saw bloodstains everywhere. And Clinton and Wes Clark locked the warring factions in a room in Dayton, Ohio, slid pizzas on the door until they got a deal out. Could you do that now? Maybe not, but maybe before, when they started, when we had the indicators and warning that they were going to move troops. And well, that's all, water under the bridge, as they say. But going forward, we have to be thinking about what a possible solution to this is. And, if you go back to 2014, I had a very good friend, West Point classmate, Mark Pazlowski, graduated, he was captain of the volleyball team, graduated, did his 5 years, and went on Wall Street. And he left Wall Street. He was Ukrainian descent. In 2014, during the Maidan riots, he went to Ukraine and joined the Ukrainian army and fought and was killed in combat on the Russian front in 2014. And so when I talk about the passion of the Ukrainian people, and I commanded Ukrainian soldiers in Kosovo. I had a battalion working for me, Ukrainian soldiers. So I know they're passionate, and I know they're technically competent. And a year ago, when this first unfolded, I was all over on TV. I was the only guy saying, we're going to be here a year from now talking about this. Remember, everybody thought it was going to be over in 72 hours. And to the point that the administration offered Zelensky a ride out. That's another thing that nobody talks about. Think about if, someone else had done that. If someone had offered to remove the Ukrainian president the night before a Russian invasion of Ukraine. If someone had offered to decapitate the Ukrainian government the night before a Russian invasion. That's another way to say that. And Zelensky famously said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. But think about that. It's never talked about. But that was, how wrong did the intelligence have to be? Very, very, for them to do that. And how bad are the instincts to remove the guy that rallied his people, rallied his army. And yeah, I think he's a little over the top now with the TV stuff and all that. But, information warfare is part of warfare. So I don't question anything that he's doing. But, getting back to your question, Ricardo, about China. China is leveraging Russia against us to have us continue to focus myopically on Ukraine so that they can come, the Pacific Front. We got some carriers out there and we can do a two-front thing, but it's hard, man. That's a really hard, Taiwan's a really hard PhD level exterior lines of communication over air and sea. That's really, really hard. On that happy note, are there any other questions? I'd love to keep talking. We got anything online, Patrick?
No, I have a quick question for you though. It's regarding, military, it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And some writers, some of your colleagues, I'm not asking you to name names, but where do people get it wrong? A lot of times there's, it's nuance, subtlety in depicting military life. Do you ever read thrillers and you think, this person doesn't know what they're talking about?
Yeah, where do people get it wrong? Other authors. And I'm sure I've got some things wrong. And by the way, Patrick was showing me before this started, like his father, grandfather, great grandfather, all West Point graduates. They're World War II hero generals and all that kind of stuff. So thanks for your family service,
I
Patrick.
really broke that tradition.
Well, you're doing a great service at helping people read. I think where, perhaps even I have gotten wrong is your hero cannot be invincible, right? They can't be comic book Superman, and either emotionally or physically, and they can't be shot 7 times and keep going, and lose a hand and keep going, and shot in the head. I think some of that is overdone. Some of my peers who I think do a fantastic job of pacing the protagonist, and like Mark Brainey, I think is probably one of the best out there right now. Mark, I read his Sierra 6, and I try not to read a lot in my genre because I don't want anybody to say, oh, you stole my idea. But the tension that Mark creates and the reality, like Fort Gentry gets something really wrong, in that book that would be easy for any soldier or CIA operative to get wrong, and overcomes that, and he's semi-invincible, but you're willing to suspend disbelief because he keeps it grounded, and that's always something in the back of my mind when I'm writing, is that how many more shots can this guy absorb, or whatever, or the emotional trauma. And people don't really think about the emotional trauma. As someone who served for 28 years, lots of combat time, I lost friends in combat. I lost friends when I wasn't in combat. I was the XO to the chief of staff, getting the casualty reports every morning, the vice chief of staff, and seeing friends' names on there. That scars you. That takes a toll. And you think about your proteges are no longer there. The people that you were grooming to be, 10-star generals and that kind of thing. It's very damaging. And you have to heal and overcome that. And so that's really what Garrett Sinclair is wrestling with. Loss of his wife, the loss of his command sergeant major. How is he handling all of that? And how does he resolve that conflict in his mind and make it all right for him and for his country, which he loves?
Well, should we break up and have you sign some books for us?
Any questions?
Any other last questions?
I have
Okay, Ron.
No, it's not for you, sir, it's for him. So what's the process for, you go purchase a book and then?
Oh, yeah,
Read?
we do, yes.
How
We
to
have
do it?
copies of the books up front there on the table. And we'll just kind of have you fold up your chair.
I'll just stand right here and sign.
Yeah, or if you prefer, we can put you at that table.
No, that's great. Like,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers, and thanks to everybody watching on.
Yeah, did you bring hot dog from the
No.
I'll take
Does it hit? Yes.
I might be wrong, but I don't know.
What was that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I take
The person on this one.
I don't know that. No. I think it's